Opposed? Dinner hit the table late.
All right, it's 7 o'clock, so we'll call this meeting of the Garfield Township Planning Commission to order. First order of business is to recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
John or Steve, somebody going to take a roll call for us?
Yes. DeGood,
Here.
Fudge,
Here.
Augustinelli,
There.
Klein,
Here.
Robertson,
Here.
McManus,
Here.
Racine.
Here. First item on the agenda is public comment. If anybody from the public would like to comment, they're welcome to come forward and use the mic and state your name and tell us what you'd like to tell us. We're going to have another public comment at the end of the meeting, so you've got two opportunities if you would like. So at this point, if anybody wants to tell us anything, please come forward and listen. As usual, nobody wants to come forward and tell us anything, so we'll close the first public comment. Next item is a review and approval of the agenda. If anybody has a conflict of interest, we ought to hear about that, and if not, we need a motion to approve the agenda.
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Support.
Any further discussion on that? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Next on the agenda is a review of the minutes from our August 9th meeting. Does anyone have any suggested changes to those?
Make a motion, we adopt the minutes as presented.
Support.
Any additional discussion on that motion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Next up is correspondence. John, any correspondence we need to know about?
There are 3 items in the packet. There's a notice from Blair Township, which is a notice of intent to plan to review and update their master plan. There's a study report from Traverse Connect called the Charter Township of Garfield Industrial Park Market and Feasibility Study. That will be addressed under later when we discuss the master plan update under unfinished business. And then there's also a outline of the the Michigan Association of Planning conference that's going to be at the Grand Traverse Resort on October 4th through the 6th. So this gives a little bit more detail on some of those sessions that are going to be there coming up in October.
Thanks. Next up on the agenda is reports. Molly, any town board report this evening?
Let me just mention, we have a Class C liquor license that we're trying to give out. We had 3 very interesting proposals for that. One is an inside dog park bar, and that would be located at Marketplace. And one, the curling club wants it, and then the other is High Tops, and they are an organization that would like to do a 24-hour food service with liquor. I think they can go till 2 o'clock in the morning. But that would be Jonathan B. Pub and back in the Grand Traverse Mall. So just a few things. The board tabled it, but it'll be coming up again, so.
Thanks, Molly.
Molly, what's a Class C liquor license?
And that lets them serve all kinds of alcohol.
Okay. Others are more limiting?
Well, you can get a club license, and then
Which-
you have to be a member. There are other,
Okay.
like a dozen different alcohol deals, but I thought there was a beer and wine one, but evidently not.
There's, I believe, a microbrew one.
Yeah, if you have your own.
Right, if you brew your own. But yeah, Class C is like the full, includes hard liquor, beer, wine, everything. And then there's some more limited ones after that.
And does the curling club already have some kind of license?
They have a club
They
license.
have a club license. Okay. Thanks. I was just curious.
Oh, they're doing a really interesting, they serve their liquor through a machine. They don't have a bar, and you have a card, and you put it up there, and so it will limit you to so many ounces of alcohol on that card in an evening, and, yeah.
I hope they don't do that at the dog park one. How are the dog's gonna carry the card?
I know.
You chuckle about that. I was up at Pepsi a couple weeks ago, and there's a big building going up. It's in Blair, right across from Pepsi, and it's a Bark and Brew. It's
It's the same kind of idea.
It's a brew pub. They're gonna brew beer there, and it's a brew pub with a dog park in Blair. So Bark and Brew, it's called.
Inside, but are they gonna be inside, outside?
No, well, the building, yeah, the brew is inside, but the dog park is open outside dog park.
This is
Joe-
all inside.
Yeah.
Do your cows feel left out of this kind of thing?
I could almost walk to that one, Joe. It's not far away.
All right, moving along from the dog stories. Do we have any ZBA report tonight, Bob?
Yes, I do. We had a meeting last Thursday. We had one item on the agenda. Gentleman wanted to put an addition on his garage on South Silver Lake Road, and it was tabled due to the size of the structure. So it's gonna be coming back to us next month.
Okay, thank you. Chris, anything news on the Parks and Rec Commission?
We have not met since our last meeting.
One thing I wanted to mention to you, I was over at the Commons at the trailhead that's right opposite the parking lot of TBA. At least I guess I'm always going to call it TBA. It's not that anymore. And before I started hiking, I was waiting for some other people, and somebody came down the hill, not at a high speed, but wearing like a motocross helmet on a motorized e-bike. And I'm thinking, that's just what we need, more conflict, more speed, and more conflict between cyclists and pedestrians. So in case that's a relatively new phenomenon, because I haven't seen it there before, the Parks and Rec Commission may want to be
Yeah.
aware of that, and staff too, as far as your interplay with Norte and others, that,
Curious, in your observation, was this something akin to a mountain bike that appeared to have an electric assist? Or did it look more like there are other types of battery-powered enhanced vehicles that look more like dirt bikes?
I wouldn't swear to it, but I think more like the latter.
The dirt bike.
Yeah, and when he got onto the parking lot, he turned around and headed south with some pretty good speed to it.
Yeah.
Didn't make a lot of noise.
Yeah, the real struggle, and as you're all aware, I was on the board of TART for a considerable time, and I know that they're even more engaged in the electrical assist e-bike issues. But the base level is you got to pedal in order to get an electric assist, and then there are different throttle and control levels above that. And Steve, I'm sure you know quite a bit about this too, because of your involvement in the League of Michigan Bicycle, right? League of Michigan.
LMB, yeah, I'm on their board, yep.
And then there's this whole other class of bicycles, which are kind of trying to call themselves bicycles, but are really, they have the power and even the range of, I mean, if it had the same amount of power and it was an electric engine, we would be writing them a ticket for that vehicle. It's the distinction of the electric versus we seem to be more forgiving of what all these e-bikes do, but they have the same amount of power as many small motorcycles and mopeds.
Yeah, I didn't mean to belabor it, but
Sorry.
my first observation, I'm thinking this is like a two-wheeled ORV.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that probably doesn't belong, at least in my opinion, it probably doesn't belong on the trails at the Commons that we want for hikers primarily, and maybe regular pedaling bicyclists are gonna have some legal ability to utilize those trails now that the state deed restrictions were removed. But I didn't think we really wanted motorized stuff, so I thought I'd
Completely
at
agree.
least alert folks that
No, thank you.
that
Thank you.
observation was made. So. Anyway, Joe, any Joint Planning Commission activities?
Yeah, we had a second meeting this quarter. We just had two issues, well, one issue and one update, but we did approve the language amendment to the Commons master plan to allow the rebuilding of the central receiving building. And that goes to the town board and the city commission, so you guys will probably be seeing that shortly as far as for you to look at and ultimately approve. And then we got another peek of an update on the infrastructure plan again, and it's ongoing on that.
Thanks, Joe. John or Steve, any staff report this evening?
Yeah, we've got a few items. Steve's going to mention the master
Yeah,
plan.
I'll just mention, since we're trying to do that at each of the meetings, and for the benefit of anyone watching in the audience, we might have actually a record crowd at our study session, but we are studying the master plan at our study sessions. This is one of them. We're going to be talking about that later tonight on some additional sections, but we're using this page on the website, garfield-twp.com/masterplan.asp, to put all the stuff that we've been reviewing. So we did a visual preference survey at our pop-up event. We put those images up there. We have some of the draft chapters that we've been reviewing with Plan Commission, the community survey from the end of last year that has been one of the key pieces of community engagement. So we'll keep posting things for update on this. Please forward this to anyone who's interested in knowing what's going on about our master plan, and anyone can contact staff if they have anything to say or come to one of these meetings.
Thanks, Steve.
Also wanted to mention in that Michigan Association of Planning Conference that we have, that communication, the township is going to host a tour, a mobile workshop on Thursday, October 5th. It's actually on the second to last page of that handout there, and it's called, the mobile workshop is called Attention Former Kmart Shoppers Transforming the Cherryland Mall. So it's basically gonna be an event where we're gonna have those attendees that sign up for it are gonna travel by bus from the Grand Traverse Resort over to the mall, and then we'll do a small walking tour of the mall, talking about stuff that's underway, some of the stuff that's been completed, and kind of walking through the property. We'll point out, obviously, what's happening at the Kmart. There's the curling center, which will probably end up at that location. We have the cooperation of Kevin Byrne, who's the vice president of the curling club, that will be able to host us and the visitors to that location. But for your information, we did meet recently with the Traverse City Symphony Orchestra to talk about a portion of using that Kmart building as well. And that will have to be an amendment to that site plan that the curling center first went under. And if you recall, there was some provisions in there to delay the landscaping and some of the sidewalks. So that'll be coming back. But talking about that, as well as have been working a little bit more with the plans for the reuse of the Sears as the electric karting center there, go-kart center. So talking about some of those things that are kind of in the mix right now. So it's a work in progress, certainly, but we've certainly have some movement, plus the outlot development that's going on there, the Wendy's, the coffee shops. There was a plan that was approved recently by the Planning Commission for that outlot over there by the curling center that will be another commercial building. So it gives an opportunity just to show people that there can be some transformation into some of these older obsolete facilities. And certainly I think the theme that we've seemed to be cropping up there is less retail and really kind of more of an entertainment mix of uses that seem to be gravitating towards that location. So a good opportunity to kind of showcase the mall. I think the township played a very strong part in that by holding back the attempt to try to establish some industrial uses in there, mainly storage units and so forth, and holding the line on that and trying to create some more activity, as well as participating in some of the redevelopment. The township board approved a brownfield redevelopment plan for the curling center to help with some of the remediation on some of the asbestos and some of the other materials that were in that old Kmart. So a good opportunity to kind of showcase. If anybody's interested in joining us, always helps. I mean, Steve and I are staff, and it'd be kind of nice to hear from some of the township officials. So you're more than welcome to join us, as well as I encourage you to really take a look at some of the items, sessions and so forth for this conference. It's usually a very good conference, and it's right here locally, so it's something that you don't have to do the full conference if you just want to do a day or something like that. There's some options there, but please let us know if anybody's interested.
Thanks, John.
And one other item.
Okay.
Meyer, have been in communication. We're trying to organize a meeting related to that gate that they placed at the back end of their property against Frankie Road. So haven't had anything concrete yet, but they are aware of our concerns regarding that, and I'm expected to have a meeting here shortly.
Thank you. Moving along then, under unfinished business, first up is item 6A, Planning Department Report 2023-102, Master Plan Update. And we're going to talk this evening about future land use and master street plan.
Yeah, this probably, you know what, Steve, would be good to highlight maybe the district nodes and corridors map.
We're gonna go start with that map. Okay.
Yeah, that kind of gives you a sense of what, as just a reference. So last month, we kind of talked about these areas to some degree. Just to recap, we kind of have three different levels here of specific areas within the township that we're identifying. This will supplement the future land use map. These will be areas that are a little unique or have some special aspects to them that we really wanted to highlight, that with some very specific guiding principles related to development. So this will help when determining rezonings, development reviews, and so forth. It's important to understand that when we review things like a plan unit development, special use permit, et cetera, they typically all relate back to the master plan. So this gives great opportunity for the township through its master plan to kind of put in some added elements in here. So the districts are intended to be, those blue ones, those tend to be larger. We kind of could consider them to be something like a neighborhood, although some of them are much larger than that. But they're just kind of broad areas where we can see some commonalities of some land use patterns that really require us to maybe take a little deeper dive. We do have the nodes, which are really more centered, typically around an intersection or something of that nature, that is to, again, activity, typically having something maybe of a commercial element to it that would require some additional standards to it. And then finally, there's kind of three different corridors that we've identified. There's the South Airport corridor, and we didn't really go on the full length of South Airport. We really focused on that area that we felt really needs some added attention, and that's basically from the Boardman River going east to Garfield Avenue. Thought that, because that's an area that gets a lot of congestion, there's a lot of issues related to that, and so that's one area. Hart and Hammond, obviously Hammond Road with the crossing of the Boardman and the extension of reconfiguration of Hartman over to US 31. And then that area of 31, which we've kind of been dubbing the Southview Parkway corridor, basically from the toe of McCrae Hill up to the city limit. An area where we can see continued efforts in terms of access management, different aspects of that area having a more cohesive layout in terms of commercial retail through that particular area. So these were kind of laid out, and last meeting we kind of went through and talked about maybe some of the unique values of them. So what we have is we have some text here. We're not necessarily going to go and read through all of this, but we do have some text prior to the map here, and we've kind of identified them by a code. For instance, like Barlow Garfield is D1. So some of the guiding principles in here are taken from the original Barlow-Garfield neighborhood plan, which was a sub-area plan that was part of the ordinance that was, excuse me, the master plan that we did a few years ago. We've now kind of melding that into this new master plan. I would just let you know that this is still a work in progress, so a lot of the text here is very raw. We could see this being narrowed down even more. Our ultimate goal is to kind of create a plan that is going to be very accessible when you read it. And so certainly brevity is important in terms of it, but at the same time, we don't want to lose out on some of the important aspects of it. But with, for instance, under D1, the Barlow-Garfield district, there are some guiding principles, and some of these are repeated, at least the subject matters are repeated in some of those other districts and nodes, for instance, like mixed use, talking about mixing in higher density residential with commercial, entertainment uses, maybe institutional uses or light industrial, talking about public spaces where people can gather. Connectivity can be both in terms of motorized and non-motorized. So a lot of times we're looking at ways to do cross-access or maybe create private drives or even public roadways to connect different areas. But also, very important is to the walkability aspect of the non-motorized connectivity is identified. In D1 there, we also mentioned site design and housing. Some of those parts after that where it talks about future land use and description, zoning and infrastructure, those we're probably going to pare back significantly. Again, we were just translating some of the information that in principles that were in the original Barlow-Garfield neighborhood plan. But when you look at something like D2 on page 19, which is the Boardman River one, there's basically three principles there. There's water protection in terms of the water quality of the Boardman River. There's connectivity. In this case, it's definitely non-motorized connectivity, trails along the river as well as crossings of the river. And then viewshed protection along the Boardman Valley to ensure that some of the vistas and that the river quality in terms of its viewshed is protected as well. So those again are some of the things what's unique about the Boardman Valley that we just want to call out in addition to any kind of generic future land use designation. So we have the Ide property. We're looking at residential and connectivity. The Ide property is what we're kind of calling that area behind Sam's Club, which is about 200 acres plus of potential development. It's currently zoned R1 through that particular area, but we haven't seen any concrete plans yet. So we want to say this is some of the things that we are expecting to happen in that particular area. Planned residential development, non-motorized as well as motorized connections. Garfield Center is that kind of really centered around the mall. Certainly we've seen the mall have some better days and it's got some challenges, but we see that as really great potential for redevelopment and reinvestment. And so some of the things we're talking about that area along with the crossings across the street in connection to that is, this is a mixed use area that there could be greater intensity of some of the uses in there, particularly for the incorporation of high density residential. Town center design, so this kind of more of a character that would be more of a town center or a village. Connectivity improvements, infrastructure improvements, providing the zoning that would work best for that particular area. Moving on, Lafreniere Hill, that's a couple of items there. We know that that's really being built out right now. It's the demand for that area and the construction that's underway in that area is significant, but certainly we want to keep the focus on connectivity. We have talked about ways to provide some neighborhood services there. The Beta Traverse City Housing Commission development does have a small amount of commercial aspect to it that can provide some basic services for the residents in that area. McCrae Hill is obviously the US 31. The viewshed obviously is important in that area. Land conservation, connectivity, that's how the connection between the extension of Hartman Hammond over to 31 is going to be having a lot of bearing on what happens in that particular area. The one that's kind of wide open is northwest Garfield, up in that particular area. Probably a big factor in this is the recent extension of a water main into Long Lake Township. So this now is an area that we want to see as potential increase in residential. There's also connections in this area that are important, whether they're roadways or non-motorized. We talked about Rennie Hill, that's the area that we're calling, Veterans Drive is his historical reference. And the mixed use along this corridor as well as connectivity. Rennie Plains, which is the area down Rennie School Road and US 31 about mixed use. In that area, infrastructure improvements that are needed, particularly water service, for instance, on the Olson Foundation site, as well as connectivity through that, both motorized and non-motorized. Silver Lake is important in terms of maintaining water quality. Infrastructure, there's been at least discussions, very preliminary, or at least understanding at some point there may need to be some sanitary sewer service in that particular area to protect the quality of the lake, as well as some future connections related to non-motorized. Spring Hill is the area that we kind of talk about in the southeast corner. It's a very attractive area, a lot of rolling hills in that area. Has some amount of agricultural that could potentially be an area for some agritourism. Certainly some residential development, but that's kind of predicated upon availability of utility services in there. So those are kind of the districts. I don't know if anybody had any questions or comments on some of this language.
Commissioners, any comments, questions on the district part of things? I had a couple, John. On the first one for Barlow Garfield on page 17, it talks about, I guess the several lines down the page, but the first bullet point, west side of Barlow Street. Would it be wise to maybe indicate somewhere in this thing or somewhere else in some plan how far we're talking going west? Looking at the diagram, I think you're probably not talking about much further than Barlow, but you wouldn't be going down the hill and into Medalley Park. So maybe if there's a way it might be wise to show exactly how far west of Barlow you're talking there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And toward the bottom of page 19 for the Garfield Center, I understood it just the way you said it. It's the area around the mall. It talks about it's centered along South Airport Road near the intersection of US 31. I'm wondering if it might be beneficial to us in fending off future problems if after where it says near the intersection, maybe we could say near and primarily east of the intersection, so as to hopefully not encourage anybody that we want more commercial west of that intersection. I know for years we've been trying to control the growth of commercial stuff west of the intersection. We haven't 100% succeeded, but I don't think unless things develop differently than they are right now, I don't think we were pushing for any more out there.
Right.
I think those are the only comments I had on the district stuff.
Okay.
I have one, if you, are you done?
Sure, Joe.
On the page 22 on the Silver Lake, we never really talk a whole lot about it, but the public access via the Silver Lake Recreation Area. That's kind of, what is the situation there? Nobody uses it. We don't access Silver Lake from the park. So should that be, either we should start accessing Silver Lake from the park, or we should not have that in there? I mean, the-
Yeah, true, it's not really a developed access.
Right,
It's-
so
it's
what-
You can get to the water, but it's not like there's a beach there or
Right,
a
with-
boat
with the-
ramp or anything like that.
I guess I don't even remember how that all worked out, but
It's a
the
very-
people didn't want that to be a public access. So it just sits there but it don't get,
It's not like you can actually get on the water from there, I guess.
so if somebody wanted to, they could go down there and walk in there, right?
Yeah,
It's not illegal or anything, but
Right.
we don't encourage it.
it's not like what I think most people think of when they hear the word public access. They think of like a formal.
There's no docks, there's
There's
no
no
ramps.
docks.
Should
I
that-
think-
So
I think we'd
sh-
limit it just to the boat launch probably.
No.
That's why if we're not gonna use that, if we don't want everybody to go down there and use that property, maybe it shouldn't be on here, is what
Yep.
my thought would be.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
It's been a
Hot topic.
dilemma because you legally can't swim at the boat dock.
Yes, I know, so there's no public
There's no
swimming.
swimming at the boat launch. So if somebody did have a desire to go swimming in Silver Lake, unless they're accessing through private property, our access through our park is about the only place they can do it.
Would we call it pedestrian access?
I mean, you can get to it.
That would at least suggest that we're not talking boat launches or cars going down to the water.
Well, that would be fine, but I always wondered why it wasn't utilized more and had more trails going to it and maybe groomed a little bit so people could use it a little more, but, the neighbors, I guess, didn't want that when the park got
I can
started.
kind of tell you.
Is that, you remember all that?
Oh, yeah. When they developed the park, Lee Wilson was in on all of that. And they, all of the residents that are up in there, their deal was that that would be an access point, but it would never be developed in any way.
So how can it be an access point but never be developed?
You can walk through that poison ivy and go down and be in the water, that's legal. But not, no porta-johns, no picnic tables, no, formal trails down there, none of that. And, our Parks Commission, started talking about developing that, 8-10 years ago. And some of those same people came back out, with the letters and said, no, this is what was agreed upon at the time. And I've got a letter from Brad Barnes, who was on the board when that stuff was happening, and he said, no, this was the agreement. So, you can't make a parking space at the end of Lake Drive, and you can't do any of that kind of stuff, so that's
So you think it should be left the way it,
the way the language is
Yeah.
in here. I mean, it's okay to know, if you look at a map, you know that there's a spot to go there, but, I wouldn't encourage that battle to try to develop trails and clean the poison ivy out and do all of that.
I knew there was something with them neighbors to start with, but
Oh, yeah.
in my opinion, it's public property that nobody, it's basically a buffer that them people get for free.
It's only
was-
like
it
60
was-
It's 100
feet.
feet, ain't it?
I
And
was
it's not
involved in
100
the
feet.
acquisition of that property too. I was on the board when that was bought and developed, and the biggest issue was parking. There's no parking there, and there won't be, there's nowhere really to put parking there unless you really do some major renovations there. So there was no parking, but there was, to my knowledge, there was never any agreement, there's never any binding agreement with neighbors that would never be developed that I'm aware of. I'm really.
It'd have to be a deed restriction or
Yeah,
something,
there
otherwise
was-
they've just
there may
got
have been-
handshakes
There were neighbors
and.
against it. It started when the DNR came in and wanted to connect the pond to the lake. And the people all around the lake, hundreds of petitions signed to connect it. And then 3 months later, the same people, hundreds of people signed to not connect it. And we could lay the petitions side by side, and it was all the same people that signed both petitions. It was pretty comical, quite frankly. One of the DNR officers lived on the lake and, said, hey, this will improve fishing, it'll improve spawning habitat. The people were afraid it was gonna drain Silver Lake, it was
It's not the
scientifically.
same level.
Huh?
It's not the same level.
No, it's about a foot shorter. It's about a foot. You know, they surveyed it, it was a foot different, and it was scientifically calculated that the lake would drop, the lake level would drop 1 inch to fill the pond. And then the pond would have more water and more spawning and things, but that there was a lot of fear about that, and there was a lot of fear about boating between the two, and so where one petition went around Silver Lake and they all signed to connect it because it was a great idea for fish habitat, you know, within a couple of months, another circulation petition went around the lake to not do it, and all the same people signed it. So we just dropped it. You know, it was gonna be funded, the Indians were gonna, you know, the tribe was gonna pay for it. It was, you know, it was kind of like taking out the dams.
Well, there was proof that it was.
Well, it used to be connected.
It used to be
Yeah.
connected.
Dunn had a farm on both sides of the lake, and he didn't like to drive around the lake with his horses, so he filled it in, and then that became the dam. You can tell if you walk down through that raised area, it used to be connected. It was part of the lake.
Yeah.
So, but you know, I have no recollection that there was ever any binding agreement that would never be developed. We agreed we weren't going to do anything with it at the time, but you know, it is public land. I mean, for us or for the current board to say nothing's going to happen, well, that doesn't mean that 20 years from now, the next board might say, hey, we're going to make this, you know, because there is no, that is the only publicly owned property where somebody can go swimming in Silver Lake legally, is that piece of property.
Well, there are those road ends. And those
Yeah.
road ends are.
Public.
Are public.
they? I mean,
Well, they're not paying property tax on it.
They're public, they're owned by the road commission, but the road commission doesn't do
How many
anything
of
with
those are
them.
there?
Well, there are 2 on Lake Drive.
And then that one in Beacon Hills is almost the same scenario. That's not really Beacon Hills' access.
Right,
That is not getting taxed either.
right.
And actually, the township paid to fix that a few
So
years.
there are some, well, the township was approached to
approve.
develop the Beacon Hills.
I thought they paid for some erosion control a few,
They did some of that, but
Probably the
the
best.
town board was not, we don't have lifeguards and, you know, we don't have anybody to really patrol that. And we didn't want to do that. And the people in Beacon Hills didn't really want it to be open to everybody. They
They
just
wanted
wanted
they wanted to fix
us
it theirs.
to
That was the hitch.
fix it for
They
them.
wanted the township to come in and improve it, put a nice park in there, but they said, oh, we have to let the general public use it?
Oh,
Then
shoot,
Beacon Hills
yeah.
backed away and said, no, we're gonna go ahead and retain ownership of that. They wanted to deed it to the township. We were like, okay, but that becomes a public park. Oh, well, then we don't want that. We want it improved on the township's dime, but we don't wanna let everybody else use it. So the township walked away, so.
Yeah, so those, well, I think it's okay to mention that it's there. But
But we're probably, I'll say we'll just probably limit it to the MDNR boat launch, only because public access typically denotes some type of formal developed access, whether, you know, it's a boat launch or docks or something of that nature, like a formal beach type thing. So even though there is access there, I think,
I like John's talk about pedestrian access or,
Okay.
you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
primitive access, maybe would be a better word, you know? I mean, but it is.
Unimproved access.
If
Unimproved
somebody
access?
decides to park at Silver Lake Park and grab a picnic basket and walk down there, and there is a small sandy area there where they could lay and have a
Yeah.
picnic and their kids
Yeah.
could swim.
And
they're not
they
gonna break-
do. People take their dogs down there and,
It'd be fully legal and nothing wrong with that, so.
Yeah.
It used to be okay to swim at the boat launch, but then the DNR outlawed swimming at boat launches because of safety issues, so you can't, I'm sure people still do, I'm sure they do, but it's actually not legal to.
So there's a sign there saying no swimming.
Yeah, says it's signed, no swimming, yeah. Interesting.
Chris?
I was looking at the Cedar Run Campus N2 node on page 24. And
Well,
just,
you're getting ahead of us, Chris.
Oh, I'm
We're
sorry.
not into
That's
nodes.
fine.
Well, we're not into nodes. You haven't gone through nodes yet. You were just going through the districts. So
I'll wait
I thought we were limiting our comments to the
Okay.
districts.
Okay,
and
sure.
You take us further, then we'll have questions perhaps. All right. Sorry, Chris, I just think.
No worries.
Let's wait till we hear from staff and then we'll fire away on the next subject. Are we ready for nodes then? Anybody else got more district comments, questions?
I'm disappointed they didn't come up with the 7 Hills of Garfield, but they,
Well, we have them, but we just didn't list them out here. But
Yeah,
we've
yeah.
already found the 7 hills of Garfield.
Yeah.
you up to 5. I count 5 hills, but I don't count 7 yet.
All right, John, you want to keep
Yes,
going?
so nodes are basically similar to a district, but more highly concentrated. Like I said, it will typically center around some commercial or developed land use other than residential. So we have 4 of them that we've identified. Brookside Commons is basically building on the PUD that was originally done at the west corner of Zimmerman and North Long Lake Road. That there's some office in the PUD to the west of that going towards the high school. And then to the south of that with the Meadow Valley, there's that development going on, which has senior living in that place. But we're looking at this a little bit broader, kind of looking at towards the north, because this particular area, there's the R2 zoning that was put in place directly north of Brookside Commons, and the potential for that area to really have maybe some smaller homes on smaller lots. There is water sewer service in that area, so it lends itself. Proximity to other services beyond, whether it's in the city or areas down at Copper Ridge, kind of really make it conducive to maybe something that would either be single-family detached or attached, or maybe even some duplexes that would be permitted in R2. And potentially there is that little commercial, it hasn't not been developed as part of that Brookside Commons PUD, but could provide some basic neighborhood services for those residents in that area. The Cedar Run campus, that's the one where we're kind of really building off West Front Street, and kind of the campus that starts with the Munson Medical Center and creeps into the township, and a lot of medical clinics are located there, and that Olson's PUD really kind of anchors that intersection there. And we've talked about the idea to continue to have that flourish as a kind of medical campus area, but also to see if maybe there's some opportunities to incorporate some residential uses there potentially. Green Hill is the kind of historic location there at Silver Lake and Zimmerman. Obviously, we have some businesses there currently that kind of provide services for the neighbors in that particular area. And then Logan's Landing, we get a lot of inquiries on that, particularly the north side. The south side is the office, but certainly on the north side where we have the kind of 2 separate structure areas that are connected with the pedestrian bridge over the river. So those are kind of there we see certainly allowing for redevelopment of that, but we want to be mindful of that area. We have some floodplain in that area. We have some environmental potential issues in there. We do, I think under the current zoning, it is general commercial in that area, but we would be reluctant to really have any auto oriented uses in there. Just, we've had some inquiries for like a car wash, that type of thing. Those types of uses really might not be conducive in that location, particularly in its proximity to the river. Well, those are kind of the 4 node areas that we thought we'd kind of single out.
All right, Commissioners, Chris, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, on a couple of comments on the Cedar Run campus N2. The Olson's planning unit development, we did just approve those residential apartments. So residential would be last sentence of that first paragraph. And then just in the component of buildings, my opinion is that it would be okay to have some taller buildings opportunities, particularly in the concrete services area. I don't know what that height should be, but I like the pedestrian scale, but I thought mixed-use neighborhood scale, and if there could be some reference in some way to, there are taller buildings on the adjacent or nearby medical campus. And I think that that would support a sense of scale that would provide for at least more than 2 stories for some multifamily housing. Again, I want, anybody who's watching this, love Concrete Services. I think they're a great business in our community, but I think that part of what's coming out of our plan for this node is that we don't think that that's a sustained long-term use for, certainly as long as they want to be there. But it's certainly a better fit for some residential to infill that area in the future, adjacent to the city. And I do like the references to workforce housing in that section.
Other commissioners with node comments or questions?
Yeah, and the Green Hill node, I don't think that it should be including that point between East and West Silver Lake Road, because that is still residential, I believe. Or in a, I don't think we want that to go. If that was included, that would make it feel like it's included in the commercial.
It's actually still agriculture.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think that should be on our, that should be excluded from our node.
The what area? Which,
That point between East and West Silver Lake Road.
oh,
It's that one
the
that's
pie
still
shape?
ag, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Because it would, if it's on there, it would suggest that it's maybe in the future land use as commercial. And we talked a long time ago about that, and we just figured it would be traffic, a nightmare for, there's no need
Yeah,
to
we-
have.
Okay.
Yeah, we can
Unless you
definitely
guys feel
tighten,
different, but
eliminate that that kind of pie-shaped piece there at the southeast corner, or southwest corner, and then maybe tighten in that areas to the east a little bit as well, because I know.
yeah,
a
that
lot
looks
of-
like it goes way over the hill too.
Yeah. I don't think it probably needs to be that big. I
would
think we're
suggest
kind of
this-
looking more at what's kind of existing there.
Yes,
And maybe a
that's-
little bit, if anything, maybe along, Silver Lake, potentially on the east side to the south, maybe a little bit like south of Francisco's, potentially if that were to, and maybe a little bit to the north along Zimmerman, but not much more than what's really there.
I may be looking more at like non-motorized connectivity and like safety of the intersection itself rather than any like changes in use specifically there, and just recognizing like there is the existing node, but not to really expand too much or add to it too much. So we can certainly tighten that up
Yeah.
to reflect that.
And these are intent, this is not necessarily a land use designation, so these are added principles giving guidance to the planning commission as it makes decisions on future development. There will actually be a map that will still have, like the future land use map that actually identifies what is that future land use. These are just some added principles for that particular area.
But that corner is becoming more, say, gentrified, developed. And, I can see in the future the Mexican restaurant improving to something, and Francisco's, now they're gonna put a restaurant in there, and there's gonna be something else there, and it's sort of a little community hub of some kind. I don't know if we wanna encourage more of that, but I can certainly see some higher density residential as you are bringing up sewer and water to develop Francisco, so on the hill behind that, some of those properties, we want to think about if we want to encourage a little more density in that area. The intersection is terrible, and I think that may never be able to be improved. I don't know, but, it doesn't come in that way, it comes in
And the
that
hill
way.
too.
Is there any, there was discussion at one time, the road commission was looking at realigning that intersection. Has there been any discussion about that lately?
We haven't heard anything related to that.
We can follow up with them. As we're putting this together, it'd be good to know if they have any ideas for improving safety on that
Then
intersection.
it would be, if it were redesigned into more T intersection, then the safety issue would go, is it?
I thought you were gonna say circle.
Oh,
But it
God.
could be a real pretty
Slap
spot,
it
if we get a couple of nice restaurants up there, or, something else, it could be a really nice
Yeah.
deal
think-
if we encourage that.
Right, and I think that's what the intent is here, is to kind of give more of a vision to that area, but not in the case of these nodes and districts, is trying to, encapsulate what we desire in that area, and then this will supplement that future land use designation. So, yeah, I think that's why we're trying to call this one out. There's something obviously there currently, we'd like to improve on it, maybe build on it a little bit, so that could be kind of a nice neighborhood location.
Hey, John, there's node 2, I can't tell from the map and I can't tell from the description. Is the concrete service property included in node 2?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It couldn't really, I
Yeah, I
assumed
think
it
we-
was. I didn't see it in the verbiage. And maybe I just overlooked it, but.
Kind of right about there. I realize,
That's what
yeah,
I thought, but it's just.
there should probably be a version of this with aerial
Well,
imagery
I think
underneath.
the
Yeah.
parcels would probably be
Or
helpful,
parcels,
'cause I think in
yeah.
like our future land use map now, it's got the grayed out parcel line, so you can kind
Well,
of.
the way it's zoned is, I think, is as a small industrial
Mhm.
triangle.
Yep.
Mhm.
And so I figured it was, but I didn't mention it when you mentioned Olson's, you mentioned Mother's Milk Center, I didn't see a mention of concrete service unless I overlooked that.
Yeah, right now, it's, the future land use designation for it is a professional office.
Okay, all right.
Also on that Cedar Run campus note, I guess a comment I wanted to suggest, and I don't know when, if ever, you come up with literal dimensions of what the roads are, like I mentioned earlier about Barlow Street West, how far do you want to go? On the Cedar Run campus, it looks like when you're showing the node on the current master plan, you're showing the north end of it as basically Jefferson Ave, which is, I know very well because I live on it. But if you look at the next one of your fold-out maps, you can see, I don't know why it's green instead of blue, but there's a creek that runs basically east-west that's
Yeah.
immediately south of Jefferson. And there's nothing but single-family houses north of that creek that front on Jefferson. So I think your node ought to not go any further north than the creek, not go all the way to the road.
Correct.
Because if anybody tried to connect from that larger property across the creek to Jefferson, that would be a disaster.
Yeah, we can, I mean, I think what we need to do is tighten up these boundaries on this a little bit more. They're probably a little bit farther beyond than what we anticipate in kind of both of these, both N2 and both N3.
And I know in master plans, we're usually looking more like at a bubble drawing rather than the literal.
Right.
But there's
Yeah.
always a chance that somebody's gonna look at that bubble drawing and, well, I'm within the bubble and I demand this or that. And why give anybody that argument if we don't have to, so.
No, I agree. I mean, I think we were actually just having that conversation earlier this afternoon, is that there was a time when future land use maps used to be having kind of more of a fuzzy edge to a lot of these designations, but I think it's become very specific for a lot of reasons, and it basically is because it is so tied to the zoning that there is the kind of future land use map we see right now, where it's all defined by parcel edges, is pretty much what the norm is for most future land use maps these days.
You know what, John? Speaking of where you live relative to N2, I'm looking at where I live relative to N2, and I'm noticing that that west line encompasses the recreational parcel that is that old reservoir on the north side of North Long Lake Road, and then goes beyond to the west of the N2 node, extends beyond to the west of the Olson's parcel.
Yeah.
So you might want to tighten up that line a little bit too. Because that's where I live.
Well, and eventually, when we have the public hearings, hopefully there'll be members of the public that
Yeah.
will spot things that otherwise are kind of going right over our heads. But those that are in the know ought to point things out so that we can make sure we do this
Yeah.
the way we
It's
intended
hard
for
to
it and
read,
not make.
hard to read the roads.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, you just,
yeah.
okay, well,
Right, yeah. I realized the way it showed up on that, sorry for the people in the audience, the printed out version, you could see the roads a lot more clearly because I made them in gray. But then on there, they completely wash into the color of the map. So with this, we can also, districts and nodes and corridors, I think when we were discussing this earlier, there's sort of a few different ways we could use this information, because some of them kind of inform potential future change in a node or an area that might, where that might be occurring, like in Northwest, where we know we have a piece of infrastructure going in and that might influence that. Some, like Silver Lake, the land use pattern is pretty clearly well established already, but like the only comment we want to make is that things on water quality, if it's worth trying to look into, do we want to do sewer down here? How would that work? Is that worth it? So these can be used in sort of any different way. And the other map I want to show, John, is it okay if I'm going to
Yeah,
do
go
another
ahead and
map
show that.
here? Yeah. Putting this on the same map, we gave you the current future land use sites, which is that map with some colors, and then we put the current designations with the district's nodes and corridors on it. So taking that example in Northwest, it's, we just said we extended a water main. Is it worth it to do higher density residential, or at least higher density than what is currently designated? When we're talking about we're updating the master plan, we have the potential to change the future land use designations. So in these nodes or districts, is it worth it to take a look at changing some of them? Or in one where we know that the designation is not going to change, do we want to speak to anything else like other infrastructure, other things like connectivity, non-motorized, and sort of the nodes, districts, and corridors, we're thinking of all the areas in the township, because these don't cover the entire township. A lot of the other areas that we don't have one designated is where things are pretty well established, and we aren't expecting a lot of change from what the current policy is. The infrastructure is either there, or the land use pattern is established, or both. But we can sort of use this information. If it sort of makes sense to just roll some of these right into an updated future land use map, which we'll be looking at in the next couple study sessions, like it perhaps makes this section a little bit shorter, then we don't have to repeat ourselves. We can sort of use this however we want, but it's just sort of like a thought exercise to look at what are some areas we might want to zoom in on.
Do you want to explain to all of us what the slash lines they've got superimposed on that last map?
Oh,
signify?
yeah. So this is just the same as, we were just looking at the other map with the district nodes and corridors. So that was this one.
It's just in slashes here.
This is just the future land use map. It's the same information as the one hanging on the wall right now and in the current master plan. This just superimposes, without coloring them, the nodes, districts, and corridors on there.
Okay.
So especially for some of these areas, does it make sense to update or change the future land use designations?
Gotcha. And you
Mhm.
can really see on that map that point that I raised about the Jefferson Street and the creek. I assume that green is meant to be the creek, because there is a creek that does just
Yep.
what that green thing does.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
So, yeah,
somehow you wouldn't want the slash lines to go north of the creek, I guess.
correct.
Well,
Yeah.
a couple of things what we're looking at that we'll do, we'll bring that down probably to just follow the top end of that blue line, which is office,
Yeah.
and kind of follow that line. There's also is the creek itself. So in the current future land use map, there's some of those creek areas are defined as agricultural rural land, as a future land use designation. And I think what that was intended to do is demonstrate that there are vegetative buffers required along the streams. What we're suggesting is probably eliminating, showing those as future land use designations as agricultural/rural land, but do a separate map of our streams within the township where the vegetative buffer would apply.
That would be good.
Because it does make it a little bit confusing on some of these, because that vegetative buffer requirement is in place regardless of the future land use designation. So that, it'll get rid of that kind of that soupy look that you see there, because those are all regulated areas. That's all, it's not to say we're going to allow those, if you look at the 31 corridor, to allow those green areas to be developed. They're just not going to be able to be developed based on wetland requirements by the state of Michigan and the township, along with our vegetative buffer requirements within our own zoning ordinance. I get why they're designated as such, but it just makes it a little confusing as to what that actually represents.
It's worth basically putting this on its own map of the streams and buffers, and we can also include things like wetlands, because this starts to bring in some of the things where we were studying a few study sessions ago. We looked at the map of our wetlands and our streams. When you superimpose that onto a future land use, how does that limit certain areas? Do you want to protect certain areas that have a lot of them? Sort of seeing how they're superimposed. But this was the actual way this data is built, and being the GIS data person, this was actually either drawn or somehow merged in, that's defined in the future land use layer itself, which is fine to do it that way. It was just an interesting way to do it. But I think calling it out as its own thing, as like an overlay, we can then speak to that specifically as an issue.
Have we seen, and I'm forgetting, like a map that indicates lands that are currently in use for agriculture?
We attempted to do an aerial survey of existing land use, and we were going off based on what we either knew from just either common knowledge or looking with the assessor, or looking on the aerial on seeing if you could see rows or evidence of agriculture. I don't know if we ever actually got a complete just active agriculture map out of that, but we kind of had a rough estimate.
I mean, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are, but I'm concerned about how we treat land in planning, that people who are engaged in agriculture are no longer considering agricultural land that's viable for them, i.e. it either got too small or, if you can't grow something on it and make money, why should we plan for it to continue to be used for agriculture? And I think it'd be important to know at least what is being used for agriculture, or for that matter, what's the correct word? It's a foal, foul, feral?
Fallow.
Fallow.
Okay.
Yeah. Growable land that, you're just not growing anything on. I wouldn't want to suddenly say that, if somebody's just not growing something on this year, or for 5 years, I wouldn't want to make a mistake. But at the same time, it'd be unfortunate if we planned for it to be agriculture when, somebody in your position is like, nobody's going to grow anything there.
Though some of the more developed areas right now are full agriculture areas, though, that are getting developed. So it's the opposite. I mean, it's not like they're still going to get developed if they're agriculture, if somebody wants to buy them for that matter. I mean, look at the Olson property up there I guess Silver Pines right now, that Dunn across from your subdivision, that's getting sold.
Yeah, I see the Dunn piece, it's got for sale signs on it.
So just because they're being used for agriculture, the next owner, the owner's gonna sell them and they're not gonna be agriculture tomorrow, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Probably there's that factor, but the one that also ties into it is the availability of infrastructure. So when we look at the northwest part of Garfield, the reason we'd like to look at that right now, it's a lot of that is identified as ag, but we know now with the water main that's going down Cedar Run, that all of a sudden now changes that. It could potentially, under ag, most of our ag zoning is 1 acre lots. So you could still do that, do well and septic type systems, but once you add the aspect of utilities in it, like water and sewer system, now that does force demand for that to be upgraded to smaller lots and more traditional subdivision type of development. So that's one area that we definitely see as, with the water extension to Long Lake really opens that whole area in our discussions with the township engineer. With the water tower that went in a few years ago off of the north end there off Harris Road, with the pressures that's available there, there certainly is a lot of opportunity to do, more, like I said, subdivision type of development in there and not just rural lots. So that's kind of that equation. If we have a situation where maybe the agricultural activity is dropped off and we now have this access to water sewer services, that then really kind of changes the opportunity for that area.
Anybody else with anything on nodes? If not, you want to start talking about corridors?
Yeah, this one is probably a little less developed than we wanted to have, but it's what we got so far, and I think we kind of talked a little bit about this, but kind of the three main corridors. If we have the Hartman-Hammond, we want to continue what we have going on there in terms of access management along Hammond, and as it is extended across the river to connect to Hartman. We want to limit commercial, particularly retail businesses along there, but certainly at least Hammond is primarily industrial, but does have multifamily. The part that potentially connects the crossing, that change in Hartman is something maybe we don't really quite have figured out yet, but when the road commission, as they're going through their study right now, and they're doing the NEPA analysis and their connection to figure out from the river to 31, well, I think once they kind of find out a route, that may be an area then we want to revisit a little bit more and see how that relates to some of the future land use in there. Historically, Hartman has been kind of that dividing line. Multifamily attached residential to the north, everything to the south, more of an agriculture, large lot type of rural development. So seeing where that route comes out, we'll potentially have some interesting discussions here on how we want to see that. Certainly access is a big aspect of that. If there's all this effort to ensure that there is good flow east and west through our community, we want to make sure that that's managed. And that's been working out fairly well in Hammond. So we want to continue that. The other, as I mentioned previously, to the South Airport, this is basically Logan's Landing. Really, we kind of talked about the town line, but really it's kind of just past Garfield Avenue, kind of where the amount of commercial and some light industrial kind of tapers off. But that's an area we definitely see the need for some access management along there, combining driveways where we can, cross-access easements, improving some of the infrastructure like sidewalks and landscaping. And then Southview Parkway is kind of that 31 area that has been working out fairly well, particularly with a lot of the new developments and redevelopments. But that's certainly something we want to continue. We've talked about this area where we have right now we kind of have a mix of zoning. We have some commercial highway and general commercial in that. And so some of those uses automatically under commercial highway come to the Planning Commission for review. And then some uses that are under general commercial do not. We're looking at this corridor probably being more consistent because of the need for cross-access arrangements and access management and so forth. Probably looking at that as more all commercial highway along there, only from the standpoint that we ensure that there's some consistency that the Planning Commission brings to those reviews to ensure that as these areas are developed and redevelopment, that there's continuity along that whole corridor. It's a very active corridor. It's probably the in terms of when we talk to different developers, in terms of commercial property, is probably the highest demand area. That's where they are. That was, if you call them Chick-fil-A, they looked at over there by Walgreens, and, we try to point them to other areas. We try to point them to the old Pier 1 store where Pet Supplies Plus went, and they're like, oh no, we need to be on 31. So you have a lot of that attention to that area, so we just want to ensure it's developed in a way that works for those businesses, but also balancing out that that is a major highway going through our community.
One of the things with that one could also be cross-access, so not just the driveways themselves, but ensuring cross-access between the sites. And that can include, like when we talked with Chick-fil-A, was going through this process, having a connection in the back of all those properties to indicate like things like that help provide connectivity, but still visibility for the businesses without having to add curb cuts or potentially being able to consolidate them. Brings benefits to both safety on that, but then greater connectivity of the sites around there. So actually putting that into the plan.
Anything else before we ask questions?
That's it.
Okay, commissioners, any comments, questions about corridors? I was curious about the Southview Parkway. Where did the name come from?
That was my creation. Is a takeoff on Grandview Parkway.
I was thinking if you get another 3/4 of a mile up the hill, the view is really Northview.
Yeah, that's true.
View looking north, yeah.
Looking north,
Yeah,
and that's
you're
where the
looking
view
at-
is.
Yeah, you're right. So if we go at the top of McCrae Hill,
But of course, you don't want commercial once you get south of Hartman to speak of, but the view is really to the north.
right, so maybe we should.
Bayview Parkway.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Can see the bay from there.
Yeah, that too.
It's not on the bay,
View of
but
the bay.
it's, you can see it from there.
I think that designating it all the way to McCrae Hill doesn't necessarily mean it's gonna be commercial, but it's where we're gonna protect that view shed too.
Yeah, we
Right.
certainly want to protect that.
I think the idea, so what when we look at that corridor of 31 there's some significant width in that right of way. And you have the Kids Creek going through there, and as much as it is it's a 5-lane highway and there's a lot of commercial property through there, it also has these very natural elements that really make it somewhat attractive. Because of that wide right-of-way, a lot of the signs are pushed back. With the creek running through there, you have some natural areas. We have the Kids Creek Park is right there on that corridor. The McCrae Hill View Shed, all of that. It has a certain character that's why we wanted to use the term parkway. So it's not just seen as here's a commercial strip. That it has something that it has these natural amenities that, kind of elevate the quality of that. So that was kind of the intent of that, to say this is more than just another commercial strip where you put your big boxes in your drive-through fast food restaurants. So that's part of the whole idea of these districts, nodes, and corridors, is elevating these as somewhat of places that have certain characteristics that we can build on, so that when we have development come in, we can say, oh, you're in this area, and this is what they're little mini visions of different segments of the township. And given that the township doesn't necessarily have a true kind of center, like let's say downtown Traverse City, we do have a lot of these unique district areas. So this is just recognizing those, so that when we're doing development, we can say this fits in, or maybe this doesn't fit in, so.
And actually, even looking at this map, if there's ideas to extend to other corridors or even further along this one, I was just thinking as we were taking a look at this, extending US 31, this corridor concept all the way down to Rennie School would encompass things on top of the hill. For example, we just reviewed Bish's, and there was that question of kind of extending Olson Commerce Drive. By actually putting something in the plan to indicate, like, it is our intention that we have like a frontage road on this portion to reduce curb cuts and to have access to these. That can be something that goes straight into a plan in like this kind of concept. So if we want to extend that idea down to this, we certainly can do that. It would be a good place to state it, so then next time we review something, that question it's answered, it's in the plan.
And then call it your Bayview Parkway.
And then there can be Bayview Parkway up there, yeah.
What do you guys think of that idea? I think it makes some sense, but.
Yeah.
I do too.
It might have some, it might be a singular corridor, but it may have some different, might be 3 different zones within it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely would see that. You kind of have the area, the main stretch there where there's the mire and so forth, and then you kind of have that break there that McCray Hill provides, nice green space. Often when you drive that, particularly in the summer months, you'll notice that if you're driving along the area along Mire and then you hit that McCray Hill, the heat just all of a sudden drops once you hit that tree canopy. And also the street lights stop at that point, and it gets dark and it gets cooler, and then you got that whole other area where you get on top of the hill, kind of what we call the Rennie Plains area, going down to Rennie School. But yeah, definitely 3 distinct areas.
Have we done any kind of analysis of these roads that we would like to have go through, these access roads, like the one behind Lowe's, that we could incorporate, the Olson Road, those roads, that we would like to see those, so that people understand when they're looking at it that we're really making an attempt to have fewer curb cuts and good connectivity between the backs of some of these businesses. And so if we can figure out a way to put some of that on.
Absolutely.
I think that's in our, and actually we have it on our agenda as master street plan, but I don't think we actually included that in the packet.
We didn't put a lot, corridors we kind of included as that, because master street plan can include discussion of corridors, access management, and then how we would work with both private property owners and then agencies like MDOT or Road Commission on that. Because this is one, master street, that's the one where we looked up, I don't know if we know of any master plans in the state that has a master street plan, even though the Planning and Enabling Act talks about it. So this is sort of like venturing into new territory a little bit to organize it in this way, but I think, yeah, putting that analysis of that and actually kind of talking through that and talking with Road Commission on like how would this actually function with these roads in here, and any of the other, we looked at like future street connections a couple study sessions ago, like to include that concept in this as well.
Yeah, we think it's worthwhile to identify, it doesn't necessarily bind us if we,
Right.
showing extensions of, Zimmerman up to Harris, or whether it's the Lowe's Mall connection. I think those are things that we desire to see. We don't necessarily mean that, it may come out to the point where, no, it doesn't make sense for whatever reason, but we think generally these are good concepts that maybe need further evaluation or further development would kind of help those along. But we think it's worthwhile to at least identify those in the plan, because I think all those little connections help kind of to address some of the congestion in our.
Anything else we ought to be talking about on this part of the master plan?
Well, I think that's it.
This is a good chunk, yeah.
Anybody else with any more comments or questions on this? Okay, if not, we'll move along on the agenda to item 6B, Planning Department Report 2023-103, to talk about possible changes to the R2 and R3 zoning districts in the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, so this is following up in conversations we've had previously. This is actually the formal introduction of amending 2 sections in the ordinance. One is 314E, which is basically the dimensional standards requirement for the R2, which is the 1 and 2 family residential district. This is a district that essentially is the one where it provides for duplexes. And then section 315E, which is the R3 section that has the dimensional standards. And this would allow opportunity for, in the R2, for really some better relationship to how we see a lot of the the duplexes that are being built and have been built in our community that can go on much more narrow lots. Also, the R3 is probably the most significant piece in that, is to really have a flat lot width on the multifamily. That's an important one that is really restricting, because as it's currently, the lot width is based on the number of dwelling units, and that really does restrict the ability of multifamily to actually be developed in the multifamily district. So, again, this is the introduction. This would be the start of amending those two sections as parts of the zoning ordinance. The next step would be to set the public hearing for comment on these proposed changes.
Commissioners, comments, questions? I had one question that applies to both on page 1 of the report. The first bullet point under 314E and the first bullet point under 315E, it says remove per dwelling unit requirement for dimensional standards. And I'm not sure I was seeing where that is in the first place. I'm sure I'm missing something, but can you help me out there?
So right now, so we'll look at 314. So it says up there dimensional standards, and it says per dwelling unit, which in this, so this is where currently this is, so you have, okay, the big one is the minimum lot area. So you got 12,000 square feet minimum lot area required for a single-family home with a sewer, or without sewer, it requires 15,000 square feet. So if it's a duplex, it requires not 10,000 square feet, but 20,000 square feet, because
Okay.
it's 10,000, a duplex would be 2 dwelling units. So it's now 20,000 square feet for a duplex, or 27,000 square feet for a duplex without public sewer. So,
So that's where it is. It's just those 3 words right at the very top of the
Yeah.
heading. Okay, thank you.
and that's where removing that, we really believe that duplexes, and again, we're talking about in the R2 district, so this is a small district. It's not applied greatly throughout our community, but it's designed to allow duplexes, so it's really prohibiting that. In the case of the 315, that one is where we just basically went to, and did the 10,000 square feet for, instead of by dwelling unit, for one family and two family, we just did a flat 10,000 square feet for both, but did the 4,000 square feet as the per dwelling unit. So duplexes and one family homes, which are permitted in the R3, would have that standard minimum lot size, but then multifamily, we just moved that per dwelling unit down there. So that per dwelling unit for the multifamily is the way that we determine how many apartment units are permitted per acre.
Thank you, that helps. I figured it was there, I was just not sure where it was.
Yeah.
Anybody else with any comments, questions, suggestions, or does anybody want to make a motion, we set this for a hearing?
I'll make a motion that the draft proposed zoning ordinance text amendment as attached to the Planning Department Report 2023-103 be scheduled for public hearing for the September 13th, 2023 Planning Commission regular meeting.
Support.
Any further discussion on that? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And I think that gets us to item 7, which is new business, and we're not showing anything there. Next item after that is public comment. If we have any, it's another opportunity for the public, if you'd like to tell us a few things or ask us some things, come forward now and do that. If not, we'll close the second public comment. And the next item is other business, and I think staff's going to give us an update on what's going on with the Kids Creek riparian buffer on US 31.
Yeah, so that, right now, staff is working with the property owners to resolve the clearing of the vegetative buffer that's required along the Kids Creek portion there of 131. They have been meeting with both representatives of Fox Motors and Well now. They've been cooperating, so the zoning administrator actually walked today basically the whole length of that section from roughly around Fox Motors and Garden Goods all the way up to Big Boy, working with the Conservation District, evaluating that. In their evaluation of that, there was some significant clearing. They're not too concerned with potential problems with, at least in the short term with some of that clearing, but certainly they'll be guiding the property owners on how to restore those areas with new plantings and so forth. In some cases, they were going to actually have to, the buffer really wasn't that wide, so they're actually going to have to add to the buffer. But both of those property owners will have to come back to the Planning Commission with landscaping plans for those. In the long term, one of the things we'll be doing as part of the master plan is, as I mentioned earlier, having that stream map of the township and identifying all those areas where those buffers, so it makes it very clear to people that these are regulated areas, these are active streams that require 35 feet vegetative buffer on each side. So that'll help to support our ordinance. We'll probably go through at some point and maybe tweak that portion of our ordinance just to make it clear. We've talked about the idea of adding in signs and other postings. I think at this point when they come back for those landscaping plans, I'm thinking we could probably, we'll have to take a look, but I believe that we have some authority to require some type of signage to go with those. But I will say that the property owners have been cooperative, and so it's been moving forward.
Good, thank you.
I was driving that earlier today. I noticed, and this may be old, but the area in front of Pine Grove was cleared. And has that been that way for a long time?
Yeah, and I don't think we have any site plan that indicates that.
That was supposed to be there. It's
Yeah.
been there forever, but
But one thing that, when that, the intent of that is to move out to that area that we approved, Planning Commission approved up there on Meadow Lane. When that happens and that area is redeveloped, then they'll be required to conform to the ordinance, so they'll have to plant a vegetative buffer in there.
okay.
So I guess last time I asked you that question, so if it didn't have a site plan, then they're not required to keep that 35 feet is just for somebody that had a site plan approved.
Yeah, I mean, so it's
It's a requirement of the ordinance, though.
a requirement of the ordinance, not, I guess it's, the site plan indicates when they would have been established. So it gives us a sense of where they are in time and when that was, if that was required or if they're grandfathered.
Because I was at the soil erosion office today, and I asked them about cutting, clearing, anything above ground is okay, whether it's in wetlands, a stream, or near a stream, or right up on Silver Lake. You can, as long as you don't disturb the soil, you can take any vegetation off it. If you're doing it by hand, you get a chainsaw or something, you can't disturb the soil. So, like that Pine Grove property, they've had that for years. They've never had a site plan. They were probably there before zoning. So they could still maintain and do anything they wanted to as long as they don't have a site plan saying.
Yes, I mean, that's how, I mean, we don't have anything that identifies that they would be. So essentially they are grandfathered, and now when that redevelops and somebody
Then-
comes in, then they'll have to,
Because it's part of their
Current.
approved site plan saying they have to have, and then, because I was thinking of that as, we don't want them to have green grass and mow it and fertilize it and all that right up to the store, but if they want to maintain, some of them properties, if they don't do anything, would get so tall, they would hide their, I could see why they want to get it out of there. They want a little bit of site. If it gets 10 or 12 feet tall, they want it out of
yeah,
there.
so the ordinance does allow for trimming and
Okay, so
and all
we-
of
we for
that,
sure
yeah.
can
So
allow them
to manage them, generally natural vegetation, but at the same time, don't want it all to be forested and so forth. So that there is some provisions that'll, actually, we did have a contact made from MSU Federal Credit Union, requesting if they can trim some of that area, and we're like, yes, you can, per the ordinance as provisions in there.
And when we met with Conservation District and Watershed Center, just asking about expertise on native plantings, sort of indicating, like, obviously the business owners are gonna want their visibility. Are there some native plantings that are either easily trimmed or aren't gonna grow as tall that can just occupy that area, but they can keep kind of that area maintained as more of a low-maintenance native thing that doesn't need to be heavily trimmed in the future, so. I believe the property owners are gonna work directly with Conservation District on getting like that expertise and then come back with a like landscape plan as an update to that site, both of those site plans. So that should be coming to Plan Commission whenever that is ready.
And we'll be making contact with some of the other property owners to apprise them of this. You know, even though there's the 2 violations, all the property owners along there are being contacted by staff.
Great, good.
Anything else on Nicolette Bank? Haven't heard anything in a while.
I know Mike Green's been working with them, the zoning administrator. They've been stalling because they didn't want to plant during the summer months. But I think he gave them a deadline, I believe it was September 15th or something like that.
Yeah, I think they're just trying to work on timing. I mean, this is also why we wanted them approved in the spring, so they would plant it in the spring. But just as long as they get it in by a certain time, they've been in contact with zoning administrator to make sure that actually does happen. But we did indicate like that they had their letter from their violation, like that until you actually do plant it, that it has not been taken away yet, and won't be until that's actually resolved. But they're working on it.
Good, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions on the update about the Kids Creek riparian buffer topic? If not, looks like we move on to the items for next agenda. So in our meeting in a couple of weeks, we've got a public hearing on the Durga R3 rezoning and another public hearing on the portable solutions special use permit. Anything else that you're aware of?
And the one you just scheduled for the zoning ordinance text
Yeah.
amendment. Yeah.
It'll be on there, the text amendment.
Mhm.
That's it for right now.
It's actually 3 weeks from today, isn't it? It's not 2 weeks, is it?
That's why we were able
Oh,
to
yeah,
schedule that public
yeah,
hearing
we
for
do have the
text
bonus week.
amendment, because we got an extra week in August here.
Mhm.
Anybody else have anything they want on the agenda at our next meeting in 3 weeks? If not, Bob, you got a motion? you
Make a
wanna
motion, we adjourn.
All right, we're adjourned.
Okay.